Welcome back, anglers, man. Thanks for joining us for another edition. I'm really kind of excited to talk about this because this is like one of my big passions of fishing is when fall and winter rolls around. And I switch from tournament fishing to fishing the local waters, the Ohio River, its tributaries. I chase a bunch of different species. It's just a really good time, and it's something to do during the winter time that keeps you busy. And keeps you outdoors. And first, let's talk about safety. If you're going to go out in the big water, you're going to want to take a buddy. You're going to want to have a life vest on that's a non-inflatable one. And really, most important, you're going to want to be in a dry suit. Once the water temps fall below, really 60 degrees, you should be thinking about cold water preparations. You're also going to want to take a dry bag with some backup warm clothes in it. And you're going to want all that stuff ready to go. Because if you happen to take a dunk in the cold water, you're really going to need that stuff. That is going to be like super, super important stuff for you. And let's hope that never happens and you never have someone fall in and, because you got to be kind of serious. I fear the cold water in the wintertime, Now for the fun part, let's talk about catching fish. There's just a massive amount of species in the Ohio River and its tributaries. You have hybrids, you have true stripers, you have white bass, you have saugeye, you have sauger. There's even some walleye in there. There's drum, there's spots, all the different catfish. There's largemouth. I mean, the list just goes on and on. There's smallies in there as well. And it's just a great time. Fall and winter's a great time to go chase these fish, I think, because it's a different type of fishing. Fall is still really aggressive. The transition from summer to fall and the water's about 60 degrees and temperatures dropping. The tributaries are getting, their temperatures dropping and the rains are coming, the leaves are dropping. It is a great time because the fish are still active. You throw a lot of moving baits. Whatever moving baits you like to throw, you'll catch fish on them. And what I like to look for as that temperature starts dropping below 60 in the fall is I like to find the places that have a temperature difference. So if some place is like 10 degrees cooler or warmer, I like to target those areas because the fish will go, they're trying to stay warm essentially as long as they can. So they're just staying around the warmer water when it gets to those temperatures. And when you find a little warm spot, it's good to go. And I really like it fishing tributary mouths because the tributary coming down in to the Ohio will start cooling off a lot quicker than the Ohio will because Ohio's a lot deeper of water than, let's say, the Little Miami, the Great Miami, any of the tributaries around the Licking River, the Kentucky River, or the smaller tributaries that run into it. They're all really shallow, so they cool off a lot quicker that time of year. So that temperature difference, the variance in that temperature, is pushing the fish out of the cold water and into the warm water. And the baits I like to use this time of year for the fall transition is, like I said, moving baits, man. And a little bit bigger baits, swim baits, lipless crankbaits, half ounce type stuff. Crankbaits, anything kind of fast moving, spinner baits, you'll catch them on. You'll catch all different types of species on those stuff. Now obviously some species like sauger and saugeye, and catfish, and those things are going to take different stuff. But that time of year, you're going to catch a lot of fish of different varieties on those baits. And I like to concentrate on a shad pattern. There's definitely a minnow pattern going on too, and sometimes I'm forced to change how I present stuff, but I usually try to stick to the shad pattern for the Ohio. And this will apply for pretty much anywhere, southwest Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. I mean, all along the Ohio, this applies. And this is, good information for all that type of stuff. And the type of tributaries you want to look for, the type of tributaries I like to look for are ones that have feeder creeks in them, that are truly feeding the Ohio River. They're not washouts that when the Ohio blows out, they back up into them and have water, or just when it rains they have water. True creeks, and even above and beyond that, creeks that have springs in them that will flow completely clear and green when they should be kind of muddy looking. Those creeks, because that cleaner water will be, it's just more inviting for the fish, because in the wintertime the water gets so dirty because the Ohio blows out and gets moving so fast that these fish are going to ultimately get pushed up into the creeks, and it's usually so muddy when that happens, and debris in the water and stuff, that the fish are looking for something cleaner, and what they'll do is they'll hide right on that mud line, and they'll just kind of hang out in that mud line a lot of times, and they'll use the mud, the dirty water for cover, and then they'll use the clean water just to, I guess, clean their gills out, I guess. I mean, I guess it'd be like you'd been in a smoking building that was burning full of smoke for us. They're just choking on all that mud. So if you can find creeks that are, and here's the third thing, if you can find a creek, tributary that has deep pockets. When I say deep pockets, like 10 feet deep at summer pool, not winter pool, because the Ohio River usually around here will go up 10 feet and more, but it'll be up 10 feet consistently all winter. It will literally be up 10 feet, and it'll kind of hover right around that range for most of the winter, depending how much rain we have, of course. Sometimes it'll be higher, sometimes it'll be lower, but generally speaking, it's right around that range. So that's when the current picks up. That's when all the debris comes out, and that's what the fish are dealing with. So that's why they're looking for some of these tributaries that have these deeper pockets in them, because they can go back into these deeper pockets that are now 20 feet deep. And now let's say that deep pocket's being fed by a spring. Well, now that deep pocket, you may not even see the water being cleaner because the spring's feeding under the water. So down in the pocket, there's just a cleaner bubble of water. And you may not even see it, but you'll find these pockets, and you'll see the fish stacked up in them in those flood type conditions when the Ohio's pushing dirty water back these. So those are the three things that I really look for good quality tributaries. Is that you want ones that have deep pockets, you want ones that are spring fed, and you want ones that are just regular creeks that are flowing all the time. And that means the shad runs happens in them. So there's always shad up them, and that's the primary food for hybrids, stripers, white bass, those type of fish that are the fun ones to catch in the wintertime. And that's what you really want to look for, And you can hike them in the spring. You can hike them in the fall. If you want to see a good winter one, that maybe you can't get your boat all the way back up because of the riffles or whatever. If you go hike it and you look and there's a riffle, and then you see a 5 to 10 foot pool, and you see some water bubbling out that's perfectly clear water that's maybe running cold in the summertime, that's a sign that there's a spring there, All those would add up that I would check that out. And there's quite a few between Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana are the places that I've explored these tributaries. And I haven't explored them by any means. I've only done like 3 pools, starting in Ohio and starting in Cincinnati and doing the ones on either side of it. And, but if I can find those creeks, man, it's almost guaranteed. And here's one more feature that you have to be in a boat to find, is if there's a deep hole in front of the tributary. Like there's almost always a bridge going right over the mouth of these tributaries, because that's where all the roads are built, right along the river. If you can find one with a deep hole, a 20, 30 foot hole, a summer pool in front of it, man, that's always going to hold fish. Always. All those creeks. Every tributary I found has a deep hole out front in front of it, has held fish all through the fall, through the winter. I mean, they're good spots to go to. So the weather's still cooling off. We're transitioning from the fall pattern to the winter pattern. I mean, we're getting cold. You know, I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it gets cold here sometimes. So water temp is now finally dropping into the 40 degrees. The Ohio is no longer warmer than the tributaries. The temperature has equalized to about a degree or two of each other. So you're no longer finding those 10-degree temperature changes to target fish. Right? That's not happening anymore. The rains are picking up. The Ohio's coming up. It's been up 10 feet for months now, maybe a month. You know, there's trees flowing down it. It's chocolate milk. This is the time of year that that first section of the tributary will turn into like a lake. You know, out by the mouth, they'll be swirling around. You'll have a back eddy because the Ohio's ripping past, and there's going to be a bunch of debris collecting up in there because there's calm water from the tributary, but the Ohio's moving past it so fast. And now's the time to fish, you know, up to the first riffle and down to the mouth. I don't usually fish the mouth when it's in those conditions that much because it just gets dangerous around all the debris and the moving water down there from the Ohio River. And, you know, it's kind of like the golden time to me, man. There is that when they first, because what happens is all the fish in the Ohio River, they don't want to be in that current with all that garbage moving down it so quickly. So now they have moved out of the Ohio River because the water is cold. We're talking 40-degree water, 45-degree water. They're not having a lot of energy. They don't want to fight the current. They're not going to chase down fish normally like in this temperature. Every once in a while you'll see that, but very rarely. You're not going to see a whole lot of busting action, and it's going to be happening less and less as you go in the winter and it gets colder and colder and colder. But what you are looking for is them schooled up in those lake-type environments from that first riffle down somewhere in there, and they're going to be piled up. And as it gets colder like this, especially in that 40-degree water, the different species are all going to come together. The gar, the drum, the white bass, the hybrids, the striped bass, the suckers, everything. They're all going to come together, and they're not going to care, and they're all going to school up together. Where in the fall transition, they're schooled up more by species. So when you find white bass, you generally find more white bass. You find hybrids, you find more hybrids. You find drum, you find more drum. There's more schooled up by species in the 60-degree temp water. But as we get to the 40-degree temp water, they stop caring, and they just start conjugating where they're most comfortable, you know, where there's not a lot of current, where the water's as clean as they can find it. If they can find water that's a degree or two warmer, they'll be there. And this is one of the times of year where a mud bank may hold fish. Normally mud banks don't hold fish, or they don't hold a lot of fish unless there's something on the mud bank. But if it's just a mud bank, they won't hold it. But in the wintertime, if you get a mud bank that's south facing, that's just a degree or two warmer, those fish will like slowly migrate up onto it. They'll be surprisingly shallow too during the day when it's it's getting just a little bit warmer in the shallower water. And we're only talking like a few degrees, you know, 2, 3, 4 degrees. If you can find a little section that's 5 degrees warmer, you know, has a good chance at holding some really good quality fish. So the baits that I really like to use as the temperature drops into the 40s, really starting at the 50s, is you'll see me start tying on a blade bait. And that becomes like a really good key bait this time of year. And I'm also throwing on, I'm downsizing my swim baits. You know, I'll start moving down from those 6-inch swim baits that I'll be throwing. You know, and these are soft swim baits, by the way, that I'll throw when the water temps are in the 60s and 70s. And then I'll switch to a 4, and then it's a 3. And then I even switch down to one that's like a sub 3-inch swim bait. It's from Bass Pro. It's called the Squirmin' Shad. You go there and they say it's a 3-inch swim bait, but it's like 2 1/4 at best. And some of them are actually even a little bit smaller than that. And it's really a killer bait because the tail section isn't real big on it, the boot section isn't real big on it, and it's flat sided. And it comes down, has like a little bit of a belly. I'm putting up a picture here to show you. And this thing wobbles like a small lipless crankbait. And to me, in the wintertime, it's all about the wobble. Baits that put off a little bit of vibration. When it gets to this cold of water temps, I have a lot less luck throwing a bait that has a really reactive swimming back section, like a boot tail on it, versus one that wobbles and displaces more water, like a lipless crank. And that's why blade baits are so good in the wintertime, is because when you're working a blade bait up and down, or if you're casting it and rolling it or popping it, however you're working it, there's displacing a lot of water. And it's making a thumping sound. And there's also something to how the wobble is. Like, I actually upsize my hooks on my 1/4 ounce red eye shads to slow the wobble down on them. And when in super cold water, it has a dramatic effect on the bite. I get more fish to bite that, significantly more. I've fished them side by side several occasions, and the slower wobble as the water cooled off was key. It was just super key. So like that small swim bait I use, wobble. Lipless crankbait, I slow the wobble down, but it's that wobble, and I start fishing that lipless crankbait more jigging it. More like a blade bait, I mean, one of my favorite ways to work a blade bait is vertical, up and down. And I start using a red eye shad like that a lot more. And it becomes incredibly productive. And again, I've upsized the hooks one size, and it slows that wobble down a little bit on it. And man, it's money. It really is. There's so much to that, and the reaction you get, and having that wobble just be just right. And some of the other baits that you want to use this time of year too, as the water cools down. And you could probably use these in 60-degree water as well. Wouldn't be a bad idea. Because you always got to find what the fish really want that day. Or an A-rig. When those fish are chasing small schools of shad or minnows, it's hard to beat an A-rig. It really is. It really is. It's very specific for these types of fish, and you're going to catch a lot more of the big game fish with it. So you're going to catch a lot more of the hybrids and the white bass and that type of the more aggressive fish on it when the water's cold like this with it. But definitely an A-rig. Let's just go over all of them. And the lipless crankbait, red eye shad, 1/4 ounce with upsized hooks. Small swim baits, Bass Pro Squirm and Shad, 1/4 ounce is my favorite on there. Just a little tiny jig head. Picasso makes a really sweet one that fits it perfect. Blade baits and A-rigs, and I really like the white colors mostly this time of year, even with the muddier water that you have this time of year. So what makes great conditions for fishing So what makes your high percentage areas in the wintertime? And we're talking 40, 45 degree and cooler water. And what makes your best conditions in those temperatures, I feel like, are the differences in current and the differences in temperature, when you can find those differences in temperatures, and finding those places that the fish will congregate, and the reasons why they congregate is usually to get out of current. So that those two kind of wrap around each other, and you can another good place to find fish when the water's up is at the push sections of water at the mouth. So as the Ohio is coming across the mouth of the tributary, and it forms a back eddy in it, there'll be water pushing up against the bank. Sometimes those fish they'll just sit in there and they'll find a place, and we're talking hybrids and white bass. They'll go up in there and they'll sit in these little nooks and crannies, kind of like largemouth do with current. So let's talk about how you're going to work a lipless crankbait. Let's talk about how I like to work a lipless crankbait in the river in the wintertime. So in the 60-degree range for water, I'm a big guy to cast them. I'll cast them way out, and then I'll let them hit the bottom. Then once I figure out where the bottom is, I'll rip it up, and then I'll retrieve it, and I'll keep it running, and then I'll kind of let it slow down and get close to the bottom, and then I'll rip it up again and kind of run it down, and then just so it's just kind of going up and down through the water column, kind of like a fish that's messed up. Maybe a fish that's running from something, or maybe one that's wounded a little bit's doing that. I'm not letting it flutter down on slack line. I'm pulling it up and I'm like swimming it, but I'm not swimming it so fast that it keeps it up in the water column. It's falling down the water column and swimming. And I did that in the warmer temperatures because the fish are more active to hit it. And it's amazing how many times they hit it when you just slow it down just a little bit. Like they were following it and they just waited for that opportunity for that fish to slow down just a hair. And that's a great way to fish it in those temperatures. And as it gets colder, what I tend to do is I start jigging it more. I start using it more like a blade bait. I start almost fishing it vertical. And I'll start running it right on the bottom. So, we all know how you fish blade baits, and if you don't, you drop them all the way to the bottom, they hit the bottom, then you know where the bottom is, and you just try to rip them up off the bottom. And a lot of times for river fishing, I don't know why it is, that it needs to hit the bottom so it can snag up. So be prepared, guys. You're going to lose some blade bait. So it's not just the baits, right? Baits are super important. Match the hatch. You got to match what's out there, what they're feeding on. You have to match the forage. But what's also really important is the rod and line you use it on. So for like the lipless shad that I like to throw, the 1/4 ounce, the smaller one, I like to throw that on a medium, moderate tip St. Croix Legend glass. Now, I know a lot of people are going to instantly say, I'm way underpowered, and you're right. But that medium power allows that bait to be worked a certain way. It imparts a certain type of action to it. And in doing so, it elicits bites. And for me, it's like when I jig it with that medium power, I pull it up and then I kind of give it another snap, and because the rod doesn't have a whole lot in that tip, it just kind of limps it up, it gives it a little different action. Now, as soon as I move up to a 1/2 ounce, I throw that on the medium heavy rod, and sometimes I throw the 1/4 ounce on the medium heavy in the warmer temperatures, because the fish are a lot more active too, and they're going to fight harder as well. Because as the temperature drops, the fish aren't fighting quite as hard either. So I don't feel like I need that extra power on them in my area anyway. And where I'm, the biggest fish you'll run across here, the biggest I've run across here was just shy of 30 inches, I believe. So that's the biggest, Usually anything over 20 is a big fish around here, and anything over 25 starts being a giant for a hybrid or a striped bass around here. And we go after a lot of, or I do, I'll run into, I should say, because I'm really chasing the hybrids mostly, but I run into a lot of sauger and saugeye. And we catch these big saugeye too, some giants. I'll throw up some pictures as well. And I get those almost exclusively on the red eye shad and running it, So another way I like to run the red eye shad is I just cruise it right on the bottom. I'll cast it way out, and I'll cruise on the bottom somewhere. Just once in a while I'll get a little tick. Every once in a while I'll just, as slow as I can, with just get 1 or 2 ticks here and there. That's another way I'd like to do it. So now that we got the red eye shad out of the way, let's talk about blade baits. This is super productive for cold water. And, when I say cold water, 45 degrees and below. And there's several different ways to fish them, like there are most baits. Much like a lipless crankbait, you can cast it way out there and do retrieves on it. You can bounce it off the bottom and do a retrieve. You can rip it and let it flutter down on slack line, which is a very productive way to fish it for catching fish. Now, again, if you're fishing on the bottom, be careful where you throw it, because it's, the Ohio River and its tributaries can be snag cities. So if you're fishing it those ways where you're letting it flutter down and touch the bottom, and in some of the ways in the wintertime, I've gotten this fish them is I'll cast them out and I'll swim them back like a crankbait, just off the bottom, and the wobble on a 1/2 ounce bladed jig, at least the ones I use, and I use just this guy locally makes them, and they're just Mr. Buddy blanks, but he puts Mustang triple grip hooks on them, he puts quality split rings on them, he's got them at the right price, blah blah blah. He's the guy I go to. Cincy Fisher is my blade bait guy, so check him out. And he'll mail them anywhere too. They're just great blade baits for the price, American made. So you can swim them right on the bottom. You can rip them up and down. You can flutter them down, and then you can fish them vertical. And how I like to fish them vertical is I like to fish them on just a little bit of slack line once it hits the bottom. And again, be careful where you're fishing them, because it's, you're going to lose some blade baits. I lose quite a few blade baits a year because of how I'm fishing them. But man, that's just how I found it to be productive. If for whatever reason, there's something about it hitting the bottom, gets them to really slam into them. And again, this is like a colder water bait, so 45 degrees and cooler. Is the primary time I would use a blade bait. There are other times you might want to use them if you see them fish on the bottom. It's a great bait to target fish that are sticking to the bottom or very close to the bottom. And the type of rod I use that on is a spinning rod. I use that on a St. Croix. It's a medium with a fast tip, Tournament Legend spinning rod. And it's got some good backbone to it. The tip has enough give in it that when you hook up with them on the trebles, that it kind of moderates them being able to pull off the trebles. Again, get a blade bait that has good treble hooks on it, because if you just buy some Bass Pro ones, you're going to be severely disappointed that you hook up and then they come off, and you hook up and they come off. Your landing ratio go way up if you get ones with good hooks on them. So let's talk about swim baits. Now, swim baits, there's a range of them. The size discrepancy in swim baits can be, hell, you can get 8, 9, 10-inch soft plastic swim baits. You can get jointed swim baits. There's all different types. We're going to talk about soft plastics and the ones that I like to use for the fall and winter transition. And there's a lot around here. A lot of them, the shad are small, so running small shad colored swim baits can be very key. It's also good to have some swim baits that replicate minnows, because that's also another bite that all the game fish will get in on. They'll chase them up. When you see them busting on the surface up by the bank, man, you got something small that looks like a minnow tied on, you throw it over there. And that can be a really powerful thing, the minnow. So I always like to have a small swim bait, 1/4 ounce, 1/8 ounce tied on. And I usually have ones ranging from 6 inches, the warmer water, 75 degree water. And I usually keep it right at a 1/4 ounce jig head for all this, almost all year until the wintertime hits. And then I ease up a little bit on the weight to an 1/8 ounce. But so in the warmer water, I throw a 6-inch swim bait a lot, 6 and 4 inch swim baits, all replicating shad. That's the main forage species. I mean, they eat other stuff around here, but that just seems to be what works the best. And you work those in places like, I like to find banks that have a bunch of trees down next to it and a bunch of structure in there because those fish will hold up in that structure. And I like to get out where it's clear, throw that swim bait and have it swim next to that structure and just kind of have it go up and down, move it around. Because sometimes it's a reaction bite, man. So with swim bait, sometimes you got to pop it and rip it every once in a while in the warmer temperatures, especially. Other times you need to pause it and let it drop. So it drops right in their face. And if they're following it, it drops right into them, they're going to eat it. And I tend to like when it's warmer in the 70-degree water to 60-degree water, I'll throw it way out there. And I mean, I'll start working it right away. I won't let it fall but 2 seconds, 2-3 feet. And let's say like a 12-foot water column. And I'll start working it because those fish are more active. They're circling around, they're swimming around, they're looking for things to eat. And then as the water temps gets cooler, I start targeting more and more ledges with the swim baits. I start targeting more and more of the structure with the swim baits because the fish are being less and less active, so they're pulling up into those places and pockets that they don't have to fight current so much, that they feel a little more comfortable. So I start targeting those, and I start downsizing more and more. And how my retrieve changes, instead of popping and snapping it and ripping it those first couple feet of the water column, I'll let it drop more. Once I start seeing them like on the nooks and crannies on the bottom and on the ledges on the bottom, I'll let it drop all the way to the bottom, and I'll bottom drag them all day long. And I like those Bass Pro ones when it gets to be that way. When it gets to be really cold, I feel like they eat the smaller stuff a lot easier, and they're more willing to eat the smaller stuff and be more aggressive towards it and attack it more. Now that we talked about the swim bait, what do you use it on? For me, it's a medium light Mojo Bass made by St. Croix with a fast tip. Man, I'm able to sling that thing way out there because I don't, throwing a 1/4 ounce on it. For the swim baits that are 6 inches and the 4 inches and above, I use it on a medium spinning gear. And some people ask me why spinning gear. For that application, when those baits aren't real heavy, I like to get that bait way out there for the swim baits because that's like a search bait for me. You know what I mean? I'm searching around. I'm casting way out trying to figure out where the fish are before I really zero in on how I'm going to fish for them. So I just want to be able to get as much distance out of them as possible. And those are the rods I use for those guys. Let's talk about A-rigs. Man, that's a rabbit hole. I'm going to talk very briefly about A-rigs because we could go on for a long, long time about A-rigs. And honestly, I'm not the A-rig king. Someone else is, like Jay Wallen or somebody. It's not me. But the A-rigs I use on the river, I like to use a minnow pattern, not a shad pattern. I like them to be white. And I will put on 1 or 2 of them, I'll put some, just a little bit of color, a little bit of chartreuse to the tail of them. That back boot on just 1 or 2 of them in the group to make them look a little different. And I'll run them weedless because I'm going to be running around all different types of structure and stuff with them. And that's generally how I like to fish those A-rigs. I like to get by the structure, throw it way out next to them, and actually do like a slow troll next to structure with them. I don't even really like to cast and retrieve them. I like to troll them more than anything. And I'll put smaller baits on there so it looks like a school of fish. Now remember, if you're in Ohio, only 3 hooks. And you're going to want that on some heavy gear. You're going to want that on a slow reel. So whatever you like to use it on. I like to use it on a heavy Legend Tournament fast tip. And that's why, I put 50, 60 pound braid on there and I run it on that. Let's talk about just some other baits that you might want to think about using. Never underestimate the grub. The grub catches in the wintertime and fall time, catches more fish around here than you would ever imagine. White grub, a chartreuse and green grub. I mean, there's just It's just crazy, man. And I've seen some giants be caught on them, and you can get grubs in all different sizes and shapes and colors, and you can get some really neat ones. Vic Coomer makes some that have these like it's like a shad pattern grub that's really cool looking. You can get some that I like some of the Z-Man ones because the tails and stuff float when you pause them. That's kind of cool. So there's a lot. Don't ever underestimate the grubs. You know, and you can throw those on whatever you really want. I tend to throw them on a medium white fast action St. Croix Mojo bass because I like to launch them out there a little bit and kind of work them a little bit out there. Well, guys, I hope this has helped you all in some way, man. I hope this has enlightened you, inspired you in some way to go out this winter and this fall and catch some good fish on the Ohio River. We got a great, amazing fishery with the Ohio River right here in our backyards. Whether you're in Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Indiana, we got some great sections to fish. And man, and have a lot of really good times out there. So guys, get out there and hammer those fish. I'll talk to you later. Please hit that like button and share it with your friends.